be able to return to repositories any information that may be relevant for them in terms of how they can enrich their collection, right? So the first simple equation is the one that we just discussed. Basically, you as a repository manager may want to know if there's something more that I don't know about my records. And this, you can call it an enrichment of your collection. The second option is instead that of having records that are potentially of interest to you, but you don't have them. Because for some reason, the authors forgot to give it to you or to deposit to you, or maybe just got lost for some reason in the Scholar communication ecosystem. So we identify these two basic modes of interaction between OpenAIRE and repository. One of them is being notified of enrichments, and one of them is being notified of additions. Let's go a little bit more into the details of that. So OpenAIRE is this part, is the bluish thing, right? So what we do is we collect from sources, we aggregate in the first place, we do inference, so we attach further information on top of the objects, and we duplicate. So the first thing we have to do is to identify events that are relevant to repositories in our information space. Keeping in mind that each single object here keeps track of the original data sources who provided it. So for sure I can say, looking at the graph, information space graph, if an object comes from a repository or not. This is very important, right? So this is crucial for the kind of decision we have to make here. If I find, for example, an object that does not come from a repository, but is potentially of interest to that repository, then I can send it, so it can generate an event to the broker and say, hey, this is a potential notification for the repository. The same thing here, if I have a record that I collected from repository A, and then I collect another record from repository B, and I realize that repository B has a little bit more, then I can say, okay, repository A gave me that record, the very same record, but this record didn't have this information, so I may generate a potential notification and put it here. Example could be a DOI. Repository B has DOIs, repository A doesn't. So when I put these two things together and merge them, repository A can learn from them. So what the system should do is to generate an event, again, generating a potential notification. So here we make a distinction between what is a potential notification and a notification. Because repositories on this side, who are the same guys who are actually providing the data here, this is very important, may subscribe to receive some notification or may not. So OpenAIRE has to generate all of them, so to keep a sort of status of all potential notifications of interest to repositories, but these guys may not be interested in receiving them. So they should come up to the broker and subscribe to exactly the kind of information they would like to receive. In this case, potential notifications will become delivered notifications because they will be sent to the repository manager. This is an important distinction, technically speaking, because we have to avoid sending the same notification over and over again, right? So this is very important in a way. So we need a way to keep these two things distinct and at the same time to be able to check if potential notification has been already delivered notification to that repository or not. This is a very important one. Technically speaking, it's actually the hardest part. And what else? Having the potential notifications here gives us another advantage. Basically, when you're a repository, the first time you come to the broker, you can test your subscriptions because all your potential notifications are already there. So you can somehow browse, refine your subscriptions, fine-tune the parameters that we're going to provide, and decide if you like it. Then make it active and wait for the notifications to come. Another option is how to be notified. You'll see there are several options, and we're working on them. So the other challenge is for us in OpenAIRE is to identify potential events. So events of interest. This is what is interesting, I think, technically speaking. Enrichment is straightforward, very straightforward, because we have records coming in, they respect a given format, so I can certainly detect if a record was missing a field and another one that is merged with it instead has a field, right? So the technical part is just basically a diff between the different records, and I can tell, given the merged record, so the one that results from the union of different records, I can tell which is the difference between the individual records participating to its creation. And definitely I can identify and generate the different events. This is no big deal for me. The hardest part is addition. Addition is less obvious, because how can I tell if a record is of interest to a repository? Who tells me that, right? So I have to find ways. I have to find relationships, sort of closeness between a repository and a publication. And of course, this has to be done by inference. This is to be done via a number of relationships between different objects in a graph. And therefore, this comes down to an approximation. So this is why we believe that fine-tuning of subscription is really important from the repository manager perspective. So we should come and say, okay, I want to have this kind of subscription for additions, and I would accept record up to this level of trust, of closeness, let's say, between the repository and the publication. So let's see what we have in mind for enrichment. Well, enrichment, again, is of that kind. I come to the broker as a repository manager, and I say, please give me all the records, all my records, in fact, give them back to me if they have the BC right field that is present. Okay. That's probably because you don't have it in your collection, you want to know it. So if somebody else is giving you this information, you want to have it. And you apply the same thinking for all these kind of things. These are just examples. Okay? You may also have relationships, data sets, software, similar publications, all things that can be sent to you if you're missing them, and if you want to know more. But this is not the interesting part. The interesting part is additions. So these are three examples, actually the very first three kind of subscriptions we are trying to deliver. The first one is author affiliation. So I'm sending you a record if this record has one of the author whose organization has a given institutional repository or reference. Okay? In OpenAIRE, we have a relationship between repositories and responsible organizations. Okay? So if we find that a publication has as organization, the organization that is responsible for the repository, okay? And for some reason this publication is not provided by the repositories, which we are harvesting, so we know, we can send it to you. Okay? Of course, this is not 100% sure, but it's a good hit. I mean, there's a good chance that this publication may be of interest to you. The second one is a little bit more brainy. It's a shared project. So in OpenAIRE we have a relationship between a publication and a project, which we inferred with a level of trust. And the project has a number of beneficiaries, so organizations. And these organizations have a repository of reference. Okay? So of course it doesn't mean that if you look at OpenAIRE has 50 partners, right? So my publication, Paulo Manghi publication, is related with OpenAIRE and then to 50 partners. It doesn't mean that I have to send this publication to 50 different repositories saying, hey, this might be of interest to you. Okay? But the number of participants makes a big difference. If I only had one participant in the project, connected therefore to one repository that is responsible for, then the chances might be higher. Okay? And again, this is up to the repository managers who are subscribing. When I subscribe, I can say I want to be 100% sure. I want to maximize the chance that this is true, which means give me all these records if they have one project with one beneficiary whose organization is me, right? So basically that's the idea. Or I can, be loosened in that and and be more flexible and see what happens. And this is again something that we can do. The last one I think is the most interesting, but it requires a level of deduplication of authors that we don't yet have. If you want, we can discuss it together, but it's really not easy to achieve that kind of level, but we are working on it. The idea is to have a measure of frequency of deposition of an author into a repository. Okay, we have all authors, we deduplicate authors, so we can tell how many papers each author has in a specific repository. Okay? So if I notice that there's a big difference between the number of submissions that I have in one repository rather than in another, and this is, we tried already with some stuff, it seems interesting for council. It seems that the majority of authors tend to deposit in one place. Okay. Then, of course, you have depositions somewhere else, but these are due to the fact that you have co-authors who are submitting in turn in their own repositories. But you can come up with a distance. So I can tell, for some of the authors more than for others, if the repository, the specific repository we have in OpenAIRE is really for them, right? Really of interest to them. So even in this case, whenever I find a publication for that author, I can assume that this publication should go there, right? And then double check if the publication is already there or not, and in this case, decide to send it, to inform the repository manager. For some authors, it's rather straightforward, for others, it's less straightforward. We all know about duplication issues with certain kinds of names. But yeah, that's another policy we're trying to implement. These are just examples of what I just said, but I commented on most of them. So how things are connected with each other. Basically, publication is connected to an organization or to an author with an organization, and the organization happens to be responsible for the repository. In that case, I can construct this relationship and also assign the level of trust, which may depend on the trust of these two, or on the trust of these two relationships. The same is for the author's repository imprints. If this guy is the duplicated author, each of these instances, the one that I merged together, may belong to different repositories and different submissions, and therefore take the decision. And that's the one for project funder. Okay. Subscription. So what can I do in terms of subscriptions? In a system like that, I can come and decide which kind of topic I want to be notified of. So if an enrichment or an addition, specify which kind of enrichment and which kind of addition. I can specify a level of trust, which is very important, because level of trust make a difference. So if OpenAIRE has generated this information with this level of safety, let's say, I want it, otherwise I don't want to receive it. It can pick the kind of mean through which they want to be notified. One is, for example, with RSS feed, but you may have email. Email, it can be verbose or less verbose. You always have a user interface in the end. So if you want to come up to the broker, you have a user interface through which you can access the history of notifications that you received and check it, download it, whatever you want. You may also have criteria on the fields of the records. So on top of the subscription, on top of the trust, you may also have further restrictions. For example, certain subjects have to be there. For example, a certain name in the title, a certain author in the metadata, and so on. So you may further restrict your notifications in that sense. And most importantly, as I said in the beginning, you can test. So you're not blindly subscribing, waiting for a wave of notifications, and then decide that this is wrong. You can first, before you start really being active in receiving notifications, you can fine-tune it. Notifications, well, as I said before, we may also have APIs. Sort is an example, but it is really going beyond. First of all, we need a service that works and makes people happy, and then we'll see if it's the case to adopt standards, or come up with new APIs or whatever. So in this case, would be the broker to push directly into the repository the information the repository is able to have, to receive, right? So really pushing it into some validation workflow, like in sort or similar things. I think this really goes beyond our initial expectations. I mentioned this in the beginning, but it's really important. So redundant notification have to be avoided, especially in the case of OpenAIRE, because in OpenAIRE we are generating millions of events. I think we estimated, I don't remember, we have a paper on that, but I think it's more than 25 million of notifications in the beginning, right? Which means all possible pieces of information that are of interest to a repository. Right? We have a lot of stuff, so in principle we have to generate it all, and we don't expect repositories to receive it. They don't really need to receive it, so they have to pick what they need and start using the system. Once we send it, especially the first time, we want to avoid sending it again. Because in most cases, in the beginning, you receive, I don't know, 1 million objects. What can you do with it? Nothing, right? So you don't want to receive this every time you access the service. So it's really important to allow this kind of double check. And to actually give freedom in how to do it. That's for more technical people. We are using a lot Elasticsearch because of scaling. So the idea is that both potential notifications and notifications will be stored here. The intersections between these two, which basically decides every time if I have already sent some of the notifications that now I'm supposed to send to a repository, will happen in memory. And we will have a web dashboard through which basically repository managers will be able to search through potential notification, fine-tune the subscription, and then preserve the subscription, make it active in order to enable these two phases to happen. There's a paper that goes more in detail how this works. Finally, and this is some work we're doing with others in Europe. GISP is actually, is building a broker. Yes, actually they already have built it, so it's already running as a prototype, which is oriented to the publishers. So what they do here is collect information from publishers, redistribute it to repositories in the UK. This is what they're trying to do, or beyond if necessary. OpenAIRE is doing a similar thing, but for repositories, more oriented to institutional repositories, from to institutional repositories. And Share is actually doing the same, roughly. That's what they're aiming to do. So we started a discussion on how to enable interoperability between these services. The idea is to enable each of the services to look after a number of customers and exchange the subscriptions and notifications between them. So to basically avoid, for customers willing to receive some information to register to different services. They only need to register to one. By accessing to one of these, they will have access to the subscription of this guy, and basically interact only with one. Okay? And at the same time, on the other hand, each service will only manage the wave of events generated by its own providers. So we reduce the scale and the workload. And that's ongoing work.